I moved into the top floor at the start of the rainy stretch, when nights were longer and the gutters talked to themselves in hushed metallic whispers. By midnight, I'd unpacked 2 boxes, made tea with careful precision, and set my phone face down, screen off, to keep the room dim and peaceful. The routine came easy, like muscle memory from another life. Wash the cup until the porcelain squeaked. Check the deadbolt until the metal sang its familiar note. Slide the chain lock with its satisfying metallic whisper. Note the time with religious precision. 1:07 a.m., same as every apartment before this one, same as every night that mattered. I liked repeating a number, watching it appear again and again. It makes the mind believe in rules, in patterns that can't be broken. The first wrong detail was the sound. Rain is chaos by nature, random percussion against glass and metal. But my window had developed a rhythm that shouldn't exist. 4 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 4 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause. It matched my footsteps from earlier as I'd paced across the bare floor, as if the building had been listening, memorizing, learning the cadence of my movements. The second wrong detail arrived as a smell, faintly metallic, like a coin pressed hard against the tongue, mixed with something damp and woolen that clung to the back of my throat. No pipes were exposed in this room. No metal fixtures that should carry that particular scent. The third anomaly was light. A tiny red LED pulsing in the darkness where no electronics should exist, emanating from the wall vent above my headboard like a digital heartbeat. I climbed onto the unpacked cardboard box, its edges soft with moisture from the humid air, and put my eye to the vent's metal slats. Cold air breathed outward, damp and stale, carrying that metallic wool scent more strongly. Something faint brushed against my cheek. Not a spider's web, but something synthetic, deliberately placed. I pinched it between my fingers and felt the unmistakable texture of manufactured fibers, too uniform to be natural, too fresh to be old dust. When I withdrew my hand and aimed my phone's flashlight into the darkness between the slats, I caught the dull wink of curved glass, a lens, unmistakably artificial, before my own breath fogged the view and obscured whatever lay beyond. Behind me near the door I'd so carefully locked came a soft metallic slide, like metal touching metal with practiced gentleness. I turned slowly, my bare feet silent on the cold floor. The chain lock hung swaying with the faintest motion, the deadbolt still fixed in place, the doorknob steady and unmoved. I pressed my ear to the solid wood and listened beneath the rain's steady drumming. There, in the space between drops, I heard something that made my skin crawl. The sound of patient breathing, of someone's smile you can't hear but somehow feel, a presence on the other side maintaining perfect, predatory stillness. I told myself I was being dramatic, that old buildings settle and shift, that my imagination was running wild in an unfamiliar space. I checked the hallway through the peephole, seeing only the curved corridor that bent to the right in the way older buildings do, widening and narrowing, like a river carved by time. But there, on my doormat, lay something that shattered my rational explanations. A key on a simple paper tag, the metal still warm despite the cool night air. Laundry, it read in neat block letters, 3:17 a.m. The building listing had specifically mentioned no on-site laundry facilities. That time, 3:17, felt like a challenge, a dare written in careful handwriting. The hallway had architectural inconsistencies I hadn't noticed before. A return vent on the opposite wall sat lower than building code would normally allow, and the carpet's pattern repeated one too many times, as if the space had been stretched beyond its natural dimensions. As I tested the unfamiliar key's weight in my palm, a door across from mine cracked open with deliberate slowness. A neighbor leaned out, wearing rubber galoshes despite his threshold being completely dry, their yellow surface gleaming under the hall's fluorescent lights. He wore thin latex gloves that caught the red exit sign's glow and made the skin beneath appear bruised and unnatural. His smile was asymmetrical, taller on one side, practiced, but not quite perfect. "Weather," he said in a voice like gravel wrapped in silk, then shut the door without waiting for any response I might offer. Around the corner, past a service-only sign that seemed to mean nothing and everything, stood a narrow door, painted the same institutional beige as the wall, nearly invisible unless you knew to look. The laundry key slid into its lock without resistance, like a handshake with someone who already knows your name and your secrets. The door opened to reveal a closet barely large enough for a single chair and a coil of industrial hose, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and that same metallic presence I'd detected in my room. But the far wall wasn't solid. It was an air return grate looking directly into my unit, the metal honeycomb large enough to provide a clear view if someone positioned their eye correctly. On the concrete floor sat a ring of keys, labeled with apartment numbers that weren't mine, and the chair's vinyl cushion still retained the warmth of recent occupation. I closed the door with trembling hands and locked it carefully, then returned to my apartment with new understanding of how fragile my sanctuary really was. I pushed the dresser over precisely 1 inch to block direct sight lines from the vent to my bed, then wiped the metal slats with a damp cloth that came away gray with accumulated dust and something else, something that looked like fingerprint residue. In the kitchen, I rinsed the cloth and watched the water run clear, then gray again. For just an instant, as if the building's pipes were giving back what I'd taken from that hidden watching post. At exactly 3:17 a.m., I sat with my back pressed against the door and listened to the rain continue its unnatural rhythm. The taps counted my breaths now, and I let them, finding an odd comfort in the synchronization. When the building made its settling sounds, they came in patterns that sounded like keys turning in distant locks, like footsteps maintaining careful distance, like whispered conversations in languages I couldn't understand. I kept one eye on the vent's persistent red blink as the chair behind that service door slowly, inevitably cooled. If you're still awake, listening to these words, keep your breathing slow and steady. The rain is here with us, drumming its patient rhythm. The door is warm with secrets, and the night is far from over. I slept in fragments and woke to gray morning light filtering through rain-streaked glass, my body aching from sleeping upright against the door. Work called with its familiar demands, and I went through the motions of normalcy, because routines are the armor we wear in public, the masks that keep the world from seeing how fragile we've become. I returned home as the next storm gathered its strength, dark clouds pregnant with the promise of another long, watchful night. The same ritual beckoned, kettle on the burner until it sang, deadbolt checked until it clicked with authority, chain slid home with its metallic whisper. 1:07 a.m. Exactly. I wrote the time in my notebook, then added 3:17 in the margin, hoping that writing it down might drain it of its mysterious power. I made tea without lemon, took a careful sip, and froze. Lemon. The tea carried the bright acidic note of citrus, subtle but unmistakable, cutting through the tannins with surgical precision. I hadn't bought fruit in weeks, hadn't left the cup unattended, hadn't added anything but hot water to the familiar tea bag. The metallic scent rose through the room like a greeting from an unwelcome friend, coin sharp and wool damp, clinging to the back of my throat. On the counter, half hidden in the small trash bin, sat a spent lemon wedge, its seeds scored by a knife I hadn't used, its flesh still glistening with recent juice. The intercom cracked once, sharp, deliberate, then fell into the charged kind of silence that makes you hear your own eyelids. Under my door, a piece of paper had been slid with careful precision. "Maintenance tomorrow," it read in the same neat handwriting I'd seen on the key tag. "Leak checks. Exact time, 3:17 a.m. I looked through the peephole's fisheye lens and saw the hallway curve empty, but the light fixture above the stairwell flickered in a pattern too regular to be electrical failure, each dim period lasting slightly longer than the last, like a countdown I couldn't decipher. I opened the door and examined the metal frame where the chain connected to the wall. The paint around the deadbolt showed tiny crescent scratches, precise and controlled, the kind made by tools held in practiced hands. At my feet lay a Polaroid photograph, its white border trembling slightly in the hallway's air currents. The image showed my door taken from just a few feet away, and embedded in the corner was a timestamp that made my blood turn to ice. 3:17. I gathered my trash with shaking hands, tied the bag carefully, and decided to take it down 2 flights to the dumpster despite the late hour and my growing paranoia. The stairwell smelled of wet concrete and industrial disinfectant, the kind used to clean up things you don't want to think about. At each landing I heard footsteps behind me that maintained a precise distance, never closer than 1 flight, never farther than 2, matching my pace with mechanical precision. When I stopped to listen, they stopped. When I continued, they resumed. I looked up through the stairwell's central void and saw nothing but shadows and the steady patter of water dripping from somewhere high above. On my way back up, the red exit sign's glow revealed a wet streak on the concrete wall, something oily that wasn't water, something that caught the light wrong and left a residue like glycerin mixed with rust. Back in my bedroom, I got down on my stomach and pressed my ear to the floorboards, listening for sounds from the apartment below. The red LED in the vent pulsed like a mechanical heartbeat. But there was another red glow nested in the dust beneath my bed. Smaller, newer, deliberately hidden. I reached into the darkness and pulled out a pocket recorder wrapped in medical tape, its battery indicator still glowing with electronic life. The last recorded file played my own breathing, slow and deep, the sound of someone in peaceful sleep. But then came a whisper, close to the microphone, speaking my name in the exact cadence I use when talking to myself, when I think no one else can hear. The recording held no ambient rain sounds, no building noise, just the intimate silence of someone who had crawled beneath my bed and waited in perfect stillness while I slept above them. I texted my landlord immediately. "Do not send maintenance without my explicit permission. Change the main building access code." The response came within minutes. "We'll send maintenance to check on the reported issues." 10 minutes later, the intercom buzzed again, the sound sharp and demanding. But when I pressed the talk button, the line went dead with a click that sounded final. The chain lock suddenly seemed crucial, the only barrier between me and whatever waited in the hallway. I placed a chair under the doorknob and another against the balcony door, testing every hinge with my palm until I was satisfied they would hold. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the building sighed with settling sounds, and something pressed against the chain from the other side. Deliberate, measured pressure that lifted the metal links, paused, then lifted them again, testing the strength of my defenses with scientific curiosity. The pressure came in waves, each one slightly stronger than the last, as if someone were learning the chain's resistance through careful experimentation. I counted the intervals between each test: 7 seconds, then 6, then 5, following a pattern that suggested methodology rather than random probing. The metal sang a soft song under the stress, harmonizing with the rain's rhythm in ways that made my teeth ache. Through the peephole, I could see nothing but the hallway's familiar curve, but the air pressure in the corridor seemed to shift, creating drafts that shouldn't exist in an enclosed space. The fluorescent light above the stairwell continued its countdown flicker, and I realized the intervals matched the chain testing exactly. Someone was coordinating the building's systems with their physical investigation of my defenses. I pressed my back against the door and felt vibrations travel through the wood, subtle tremors that spoke of patient hands exploring the frame, measuring the gap between door and jamb, testing the give in the hinges. The vinyl chair cushion in that hidden surveillance room would be cooling now, but whoever had occupied it was here, inches away, separated only by 3 inches of hollow core door and my increasingly fragile sense of security. The chair held firm. The chain murmured back into place with a soft, metallic song. I sat on the cold floor and drank my tea, tasting lemon I hadn't added, counting the rain's taps until they synchronized with my heartbeat once again. When the pressure against the door finally faded, I wrote a single line in my notebook with a hand that barely trembled. Someone knows my routine better than I do. Then I turned to a fresh page, ready for whatever the remaining hours might bring. The building breathed around me, its walls expanding and contracting with each gust of wind, and I understood that I was living inside something that was very much alive, very much aware, and very much interested in the patterns of my daily existence. Let the storm wash over the window frame. Let the rain count the moments between now and dawn. If you're still listening, breathe with me. The hallway steps sometimes wait patiently, sometimes they don't. The next afternoon, I transformed fear into action, paranoia into methodology. At the hardware store, I purchased supplies like a scientist preparing for an experiment. A 5-pound bag of flour, a motion sensor light with adjustable sensitivity, and 2 wedge alarms designed to shriek if doors moved even slightly. Forensics over fear, I told myself, repeating the phrase like a mantra as I dusted the floorboards near the vents with careful precision. Under the bed where the recorder had hidden, and along the baseboards behind the couch where someone might wait in shadows. I positioned the motion sensor to face the vent directly and angled my phone's camera to catch the metal slats from an oblique view that might reveal movement. I made tea and left the lemon on the counter untouched, a control variable in my improvised experiment. 1:07 a.m. arrived with clockwork precision, locks checked with ritualistic care, the red LED maintaining its patient electronic pulse. At 1:23, the motion light flickered once, then steadied into constant illumination. The flower near the vent remained undisturbed, a pristine white field unmarked by footprints or disturbance. The floor under the bed lay smooth as fresh snow, showing no signs of the intrusion I knew had occurred. But the flower near the baseboard told a different story. The faintest arc traced in the white powder, as if a gloved fingertip had drawn a simple curve before lifting away. The mark was too light to leave clear prints, but it carried unmistakable intention, a signature left deliberately for me to find. The electrical outlet above the arc made a soft ticking sound, and a barely audible scratch came from behind the plastic plate, more felt than heard through the wall. I unscrewed the outlet cover with careful attention to detail, noting how the screw threads squealed in protest. The sound screws make only when they've been disturbed more often than they should be. Inside, the wiring appeared sound and properly connected, but the air carried a scent I recognized. Citrus mixed with industrial cleaner, sharp and chemical. Behind the outlet box, insulation had been compressed into a narrow viewing tunnel, creating a clear sight line through the wall's interior structure. The space was just wide enough for human eyes, lined with black electrical tape to prevent light reflection. I replaced the plate and balanced a single hair across its top edge, a primitive but effective seal that would reveal any future tampering. My phone's camera captured everything: the flower patterns, the mysterious arc, the outlet's violated interior. At 2:15 a.m., the intercom buzzed with mechanical insistence, followed by a knock so soft and polite it sounded almost apologetic. I remained motionless, barely breathing. A male voice called my name through the door, then added the word maintenance, as if that single term explained his presence at this impossible hour. I could hear his breathing through the solid wood, slow, controlled, patient, the rhythm of someone comfortable with waiting, someone who had learned patience as a professional skill. "We have a key," he said with casual confidence, and the chain tugged once with gentle pressure, testing its strength. "Leak at 3:17. We don't want you waking up." Through the peephole's distorted view, I could see only the hallway's curve and the edge of a sleeve. Navy fabric with a patch that read Maintenance E, the final letter scraped away with deliberate carelessness. When my phone rang, the screen flashed "No caller ID" in sterile white letters. I answered and listened to my own voice greeting me, a perfect playback that included background sounds I recognized: my kettle's whistle, the chain's metallic slide, the specific creak my floorboards made near the kitchen threshold. Someone had been practicing from extensive recordings, learning to mimic not just my words but the entire acoustic environment of my private life. He returned at noon with transformation complete. Clean uniform with crisp logo, smile plausible enough to fool anyone not looking carefully, tools that gleamed with professional maintenance. He used my name without glancing at the mailbox, as if my identity was already cataloged in his memory alongside my daily routines. His gloves were soft leather that creaked with each movement as he opened a tool bag containing items that made my stomach clench. Fiber optic cable coiled like a mechanical snake, a set of skeleton keys arranged with surgical precision, and a plastic wallet filled with brass key blanks. Duplicates shaved to near-perfect matches for locks he'd studied. "We service vents," he said with rehearsed casualness. "Camera in there? That's not us." His gaze held mine a beat too long, as if he could read my fear like a diagnostic instrument. After he left, I sat down to review the photographs I'd taken, scrolling through them with growing unease. I froze at the microwave reflection image. In the curved glass surface, beyond my own figure and the familiar room, stood a shape in the doorway. The timestamp indicated he'd departed 5 minutes earlier. But the reflection showed someone standing and watching me, body squared in the stance of practiced surveillance. In the distorted glass, a hand lifted and touched the chain with one finger, and at the fingertip, a small curve of flower was visible like a signature, like proof of contact, like evidence of a presence that shouldn't exist. I checked the chain with trembling fingers. The flower had been disturbed in a pattern so subtle I could deny it if I wanted to sleep peacefully. But I marked the curve with pencil on the baseboard anyway, making the invisible visible. The hair I'd balanced across the outlet cover lay on the floor, broken and displaced, evidence of another visit I hadn't detected. In my notebook, I wrote another line. They are practicing me. Outside rain softened to mist, then thickened again to steady percussion, the kind that makes old buildings breathe and settle, the kind that covers other sounds, while someone learns the rhythm of your life, memorizes the pattern of your breathing, studies the way you move through space until they can predict your next step before you take it. Keep your breath synchronized with the storm's rhythm. We'll follow the key wherever it leads us, into whatever spaces it's designed to unlock. I decided to stop waiting for answers to find me. If they'd provided a key and left it as an invitation, I would accept their challenge and see what secrets it unlocked. I ate an early dinner, drank only water to keep my mind clear, and left the tea untouched to see if lemon would mysteriously appear without my participation. At 12:40 a.m., I dressed in boots, a jacket with a hood that could conceal my profile, and gloves of my own. Thin latex that would leave no fingerprints or DNA evidence. I slipped the laundry key into my pocket, where it seemed to pulse with warmth against my leg, and stepped into the hallway. The curved corridor felt longer than before, its carpet pattern repeating with mathematical impossibility, as if the space had been stretched beyond architectural logic. On the stairwell landing, a shallow puddle had formed where no roof leak should reach, the water dark and viscous, with an oily sheen that reflected light wrong. It possessed depth like a shadow-made liquid, and when I stepped carefully around its edges, that metallic coin press scent rose more clearly, iron mixed with something organic and old. I leaned down to examine the surface more closely. The puddle reflected my face and the ceiling's fluorescent fixture perfectly, but the red exit sign above cast no reflection at all, as if that particular wavelength couldn't penetrate whatever substance this really was. The liquid moved with unnatural thickness, carrying threads and paper fibers suspended like evidence in chemical solution. The laundry door sat exactly where I'd found it before, flush with the wall, its paint thick with decades of institutional maintenance and bureaucratic indifference. The key turned with silent precision, the lock mechanism so well maintained it seemed to welcome familiar use. Inside, cold air carried the scent of industrial rubber and detergent from another era, chemical ghosts of cleaning products that hadn't been manufactured in years. A row of washing machines stood with their doors gaping open like mouths frozen mid-scream, their power indicators dark. No hoses connected to water lines that had long since been capped. The door behind me eased toward closure, as if it understood balance better than physics, so I wedged it open with a wrench I'd brought, then stood in the artificial silence, and listened to the building's hidden conversations. Beneath the nearest machine, partially concealed by shadow and dust, sat a camera dome with its connecting wires snipped clean. Professional work that left no ragged edges or signs of haste. The floor sloped toward a central grate where water should have drained, but the liquid there was not clear. It moved with that same unnatural thickness I'd seen upstairs, carrying dissolved paper fragments that had been soaked and wrung until their contents became gray suspension. When the room sighed with air pressure changes, the drain coughed up a ribbon of something pale and chemical slick. I reached with gloved hands and pinched it carefully from the metal grating, recognizing the texture immediately. Photographic paper, partially dissolved by developer and fixer chemicals, but still clinging to fragments of emulsion that held pieces of images. On the glossy side, barely visible after its chemical bath, was a portion of a face, grainy, lit by familiar red LED light, unmistakably mine. The photograph had been printed from surveillance footage, then destroyed in this makeshift darkroom, leaving only fragments as evidence of the systematic documentation of my private life. More pieces floated in the contaminated water, my shoulder under blankets, my hand on the chain, intimate moments captured and processed with clinical efficiency. "Careful," said a voice to my right. A woman stood in the doorway, mop in hand, wearing coveralls so precisely pressed they retained sharp creases despite the humid environment. Her hair was tucked into a cap bearing no logo or identification, and she smiled without showing teeth, a practiced expression that revealed nothing. "Sharp edges in the drains," she said, placing a hand against the door to prevent it from closing. Her gloves were the thin surgical kind that leave no fibers, no trace evidence, no proof of contact. "Maintenance never comes down here," she added like a confession that wasn't hers to make, her voice carrying the weight of institutional knowledge. "Not the ones you see upstairs." "When do you clean?" I asked, watching the grate where more photographic fragments continued to surface like evidence refusing to stay buried. Her mop's water was crystal clear, and she didn't strain it through the contaminated drains. Instead, she kept it contained in her bucket, maintaining separation between clean and evidence. "Same hour," she said with the precision of someone following established protocol. "Same curve." She nodded toward my pocket, where the key rested. "Key's not for the laundry." Before I could ask what it was really for, the building's electrical system hiccuped, emergency lights activated with mechanical clicks, and for one long, breathless moment, all the washing machine doors swung shut in perfect synchronization, like a choreographed performance of mechanical breathing. The wedge slipped from the door frame. The door sealed with a soft but final thud. Darkness retreated to reveal steady red emergency lighting, a glow emanating from an exit sign that should have been on the other side of the door I'd just entered. I was trapped inside a room with no visible exits except the sealed door and a low service vent behind the furthest machine, barely wide enough for human passage. The washing machines sat in perfect silence, but water began dripping from their seams as if the building had suddenly remembered how to perspire, how to express anxiety through its mechanical pores. I unscrewed the vent grill with my wrench, each turn echoing in the enclosed space. Behind the metal slats, ductwork stretched into darkness thick with accumulated lint and the detritus of decades. I squeezed into the narrow passage, my shoulders complaining against the metal edges, breathing air that tasted of dust and old heat and something else. Human occupation, the residue of someone who had spent considerable time in these hidden spaces. A foot into the darkness, motion triggered a battery-powered LED that framed a small surveillance camera mounted to monitor the vent's entrance. Its field of view undoubtedly included my bedroom's matching vent, completing a circuit of observation I was only beginning to understand. A narrow shelf, built into the ductwork, held personal items that made my skin crawl. A paper cup I recognized from my kitchen, a bent spoon with my teeth marks still visible in the metal, a folded army surplus blanket in olive drab. The cup retained a dried smear of lemon rind at its rim, evidence of someone consuming my tea, sharing my routine, living parallel to my life in these hidden spaces. I wriggled past this nest of stolen intimacy and continued through the duct until it angled upward toward what I hoped was freedom. Below me, I heard the room I'd escaped filling with footsteps, multiple people moving with practiced coordination. But the mop woman's voice was notably absent from their whispered communications. When the duct finally opened onto a mesh grate, I found myself looking down into my own hallway from inside the building's hidden circulatory system, watching my apartment door from the perspective of the walls themselves. The rain had thickened while I'd been underground, its sound threading through the ductwork like liquid music, mixing with the distant sound of drains, processing whatever evidence was being destroyed below. Rest your breathing with that rhythm. Let it carry you forward. We'll follow these hidden passages wherever they lead, deeper into the spaces between the spaces where the real business of this building is conducted. I slept fitfully for 2 hours in my clothes, waking at 2:59 with the precision of internal clockwork, then sat in perfect stillness until 3:17 to see if the building would reveal its secrets without prompting. At 3:16, the motion sensor blinked its mechanical eye. At 3:17, nothing. Just silence so complete, it seemed to have physical weight, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. I dressed in boots and a dark hat, set my phone to airplane mode to prevent any unwanted conversations, and stepped into the hallway with the intention of reaching street level and breathing air that hadn't been processed through the building's compromised ventilation system. I counted steps as I descended because counting transforms fear into mathematics, anxiety into data points that can be analyzed and understood. 14 steps to each landing by standard building code. But tonight, the first flight contained 15 steps, each one solid and real beneath my feet. The next flight had only 13, as if the building were playing with geometry, rearranging itself according to rules I couldn't comprehend. The red exit sign glowed with steady malevolence, and rain outside pounded against unseen windows with the insistence of something demanding entry. On the third landing, a notice I'd never seen before hung at eye level. Service Corridor C, authorized personnel only. The laundry key seemed to grow heavier in my pocket, warm against my leg like a living thing. I followed the service sign to a door painted into the wall with deliberate camouflage that draws attention through its very attempt at concealment. The key turned with the smoothness of frequent use, revealing a corridor painted institutional white that had aged to the color of exhaled breath. The air smelled of paper dust, the residue of documents rubbed between fingers until they disintegrated into fine particles. I kept my shoulder to the wall, searching for footprints, dropped objects, any evidence of the traffic this hidden space, surely received. 14 paces behind me, a footstep echoed with mechanical precision. On my 14th step, it answered with identical timing. When I slowed my pace, it matched my deceleration. When I stopped completely, it waited exactly the same number of seconds before responding, as if my movements were being fed through some kind of delay system. The corridor led to a viewing window, two-way mirror glass that looked directly into my living room. I could see the motion sensor glowing like a red coal, the chain hanging undisturbed, the pencil mark I'd made on the baseboard still visible in the low light. I couldn't see myself in the reflection, which meant I was looking from the observation side, the hidden side where watchers waited and studied and took notes. A framed map hung at a deliberate angle on the corridor wall, its title reading, Service Lines, Upper Floors, in official typography. The building's layout was rendered in precise architectural detail, but my unit's square contained an additional line, a narrow rectangle behind the bedroom wall that didn't exist on my lease agreement. A laminated time chart was taped beside the map, its entries reading like religious ritual: 107 prep, 317 observation, 403 catalog. The handwriting was upright and controlled, the kind produced by someone who took pride in systematic documentation of observed behavior. A door opened behind me without sound, the kind of silence that requires intimate knowledge of hinges and handles, understanding of how to manipulate mechanical systems without triggering their usual protests. A man stood holding a clipboard at an angle that concealed rather than displayed its contents, his ring of keys catching the corridor's fluorescent light. His boots had left no tread pattern in the dust, because someone had carefully brushed the floor where he would stand, preparing the space for his arrival. He smiled with practiced warmth of someone greeting a volunteer, someone who had expected this encounter. "Lost," he said, as if the building were an ocean and I were drowning in its depths. "Inspector," I replied, pointing at the service map with false authority, as if I had every right to examine their documentation. He glanced at my phone as if its dark screen might still record. Without signal, calculating risks with professional paranoia. "We can't have residents in here," he said with bureaucratic finality, and the corridor lights dimmed to half brightness. In reduced illumination, distances became harder to judge, shadows deeper and more concealing. I didn't retreat as he expected. Instead, I moved forward and tested the next unmarked door with the laundry key. It turned smoothly. This key had far more privileges than its innocent label suggested. Inside, a room filled with monitors in various stages of technological evolution. Some were modern flat screens, others ancient CRT units that hummed with electronic bees. One showed my microwave's interior, another displayed my chain in close-up detail. A third revealed the inside of a vent, with its metal slats arranged like prison bars. The fourth screen showed the most intimate violation: my mouth in sleep, photographed from inches away with telephoto precision. Scattered across the monitoring desks were handwritten notes in that same controlled script. Same hour. Lemon improves absorption. Walks at 107. Counts stairs. My life reduced to data points. My routines cataloged like scientific observations. My unconscious habits documented with clinical detachment. A thick folder labeled with my unit number contained photographs spanning months. Me unpacking boxes, me checking locks, me sleeping in positions I didn't remember taking. The timestamps showed they'd been watching since before I moved in, preparing for my arrival like scientists setting up an experiment. I photographed the service map and ritual chart with quick efficiency, pocketed one of the handwritten notes without reading it, and backed out of the monitor room. The clipboard man didn't attempt to stop me. He didn't need to. When I reached the stairwell, the number of steps between landings had become irrelevant because every landing led to the same destination. The same poster advertising a non-existent charity drive. The same potted plant with 3 leaves, one brown and curling. I descended 3 floors and emerged onto my own level, the building's geometry having rearranged itself around my journey. My door waited with its chain undisturbed, but on the doormat lay a desiccant packet torn open like a paper moth. "Keep dry," it read in block letters, as if the building wanted to deny the moisture that seemed to permeate every surface and space. I wrote in my notebook, "Their keys open any door they choose. The terrible truth is that mine does too. Let the white noise of the storm settle into your bones, become part of your breathing. We're not finished exploring these hidden spaces, not done learning what they contain." I called the police that afternoon with the deliberate calm of someone reporting a gas leak, serious but not immediately life-threatening, requiring professional attention but not panic. By the time a patrol car arrived, the monitor room had been sanitized to institutional perfection, smelling of fresh paint and industrial cleaning solutions. Officer Martinez examined my evidence with the polite skepticism reserved for citizens who might be experiencing stress-related paranoia. He stood in my living room studying my chain, my pencil marks, my flour-dusted baseboard, like artifacts from an elaborate game of make-believe. "We've had several calls about suspicious maintenance activity," he said with professional kindness. "Secure your windows and call if you see anything specific." He didn't check the service corridors, didn't test doors with mysterious keys, didn't examine the architectural impossibilities I'd discovered. At 6 p.m., a locksmith I hadn't summoned arrived to fulfill a work order, his invoice printed on dot matrix paper that belonged to another decade. His gloves were heavy leather designed for force rather than finesse, and he changed my deadbolt without asking about finish preferences or security ratings. "Safer," he said with laconic authority, handing me 2 keys stamped not with manufacturer information, but with a simple number, 317. In my kitchen sink, I ran water and detected the familiar scent of lemon I hadn't introduced, citrus oil floating on the surface like chemical evidence of ongoing contamination. I took the spare key and left the building, walking down the hall to test Service Corridor C with methodical determination. The laundry key still functioned, but the new deadbolt key opened additional spaces. A locker marked with my unit number that contained items that made my hands shake. Inside hung a single glove on a nail, its index finger abraded from repeated contact with coarse surfaces, the leather worn smooth from tracing patterns and powder. Next to it, secured with a hairnet, was a compact bundle of photograph strips, bound with a rubber band, each image time-stamped with neat script notation. My times, my routines, my life documented with scientific precision. The glove's interior caught fluorescent light where a thread had been pulled, and when I rubbed the synthetic fiber between my fingers, I recognized the same material I'd lifted from my vent on that first night of discovery. A smile moved the air behind me, not seen but felt. A presence that shifted atmospheric pressure in ways that registered on unconscious levels. When I turned, no one occupied the corridor, but the 14-step distance maintained itself like an invisible tether. I pocketed both the glove and the photograph bundle, then continued walking until the corridor bent toward a door with no keyway, no visible mechanism for entry. It opened anyway, responding to pressure, as if it had been waiting for my touch. The room beyond contained a desk, with labeled hooks mounted on the wall like a professional key management system. Inside primary read one tag, currently empty. Inside duplicate held keys cut to match my deadbolt's unique configuration, the metal still bright from recent manufacture. My name was printed on a plastic label strip in the same handwriting I'd seen on ritual charts and observation logs. A calendar lay open to the current week, with entries that made my stomach clench. Watcher 1, Watcher 2, Watcher 3, rotating at 3:17 a.m., shifts with military precision. I stepped closer and saw a postcard leaning against a coffee cup, my own handwriting on a grocery list I hadn't written yet, items I hadn't thought to purchase. Lemon was circled twice. My phone's clock display froze at 3:17 a.m., the digits refusing to advance despite the passage of time I could feel in my pulse, my breathing the subtle changes in air pressure that marked temporal progression. The LED in my vent, visible on one of the monitors, pulsed in synchronization with this frozen time, as if the building systems had decided to suspend normal chronology. In the corner, a small electrical panel hung open, its toggle switches labeled not for building systems, but for human behaviors: sleep, wake, kettle, buzzer. I flipped buzzer on impulse, driven by curiosity stronger than caution. In my unit, the intercom erupted in electronic screaming, and from down the hall came the rapid opening and closing of doors. Residents responding to the signal with trained efficiency. People who had learned to move quickly when the building demanded attention. The sound of coordinated footsteps suggested a community I'd never seen, a population that existed parallel to the building's official residents. An observation slit above the desk provided direct visual access to my bedroom through an architectural gap I hadn't believed could exist, a negative space carved from the building structure with surgical precision. In the narrow frame, fingerprints overlapped like geological layers. Multiple hands cleaned and oiled, invisible to casual inspection but revealed by angled lighting. I adjusted the desk lamp and watched the prints emerge like fish beneath ice, elliptical whirls that spoke of extended observation, patient documentation, systematic study. On the floor beneath the slit, a mat showed dust patterns that corresponded exactly to my bedroom rug's texture, evidence of someone matching surfaces to maintain seamless illusion. I closed the breaker panel, returning the buzzer switch to its original position with the careful attention of someone disarming an explosive device. I extracted the SD card from one of the surveillance cameras, pocketed it along with my other evidence, and walked out through corridors that seemed to rearrange themselves around my movement. Back in my unit, the new deadbolt turned smoothly, but that mechanical perfection meant nothing now that I understood the scope of access these people possessed. I added a door wedge for psychological comfort and taped the chain to the door frame so any lifting would leave visible evidence. When I turned down my bedding that night, a key lay centered on my pillow with geometric precision. A simple tag reading, "Inside," in the same block, letters I'd seen throughout this hidden infrastructure. I held it in my palm and felt its weight, its warmth, its promise of access to spaces I couldn't yet imagine. I didn't have a lock. This key was designed to open, but I understood with growing certainty that I would find one soon enough. I wrote in my notebook, they can freeze the clocks we trust, manipulate the time we think we understand. Then I drew a simple floor plan of my room with an additional line behind the wall, leaving empty space where this new key might belong, where the next revelation waited in patient silence. Breathe with the building's rhythm now. Let your pulse synchronize with its hidden heartbeat. The hallway maintains its stillness for the moment. But that silence is temporary, fragile, pregnant with the promise of what comes next. I made the decision to abandon the bed as a sleeping location, dragging the mattress onto the floor and repositioning the wardrobe against the bedroom door. A futile barricade that nonetheless satisfied some primitive need for fortress building, for creating barriers between myself and whatever waited in the darkness. I packed a bag without examining its contents too closely, afraid that looking might make leaving feel more real, more necessary. The notebook lay open to my crude floor plan, and I placed the inside key on the page, like a puzzle piece, waiting for its proper position. Outside, rain drummed against the window with the patience of something that had all the time in the world. The elevator doors opened onto my floor without being summoned, the car empty and waiting with mechanical anticipation. A lullaby threaded through the cable mechanism, the kind of tinny melody you hear in laundromats when radio reception fails, nostalgic and unsettling in equal measure. The intercom buzzed once in acknowledgement of its own presence, and my phone displayed a text from a number labeled simply building. We can fix from inside, no signature necessary. Moving the wardrobe required careful attention because I knew any scratch in the wood would become part of the story forever. It scraped anyway, the sound sharp and final against the floor. Behind it, the wall that had appeared flat and solid revealed a cut line at knee height, a seam painted over with two different sheens, one matte from a roller, one glossy from a brush, used to hide the evidence. I tapped the surface and heard the sound change from solid to hollow to something deeper, more resonant. A draft rose from the gap, carrying dust and that persistent lemon scent, mixed with metallic tang. I slid a putty knife into the seam and pried with gentle pressure, feeling the drywall give way like a secret being unwrapped. Behind the false wall lay a crawl space just large enough for human occupation, lined with insulation compressed flat by extended weight. Someone had spent considerable time here, enough to wear permanent impressions into the material. A small battery-powered fan hummed with electronic efficiency, positioned to circulate air and prevent the occupant from waking themselves with their own breathing. A paper cup bearing my kitchen's coffee brand sat beside a spoon I recognized from my own drawer, bent in a way that matched my unconscious habits. A folded blanket in olive drab waited at the far end. Protein bar wrappers lay neatly stacked, and a water bottle with a straw attachment allowed for silent hydration during long observation periods. A stack of handwritten notes topped by a page that made my vision blur. Same hour, same curve, smiles, gloves, keys. My words, my observations, my private thoughts rendered in someone else's precise handwriting. At one viewing slit, just a knife-width gap at baseboard height, I found a rectangle of acetate taped in place as a lens, angled to correct for parallax from inside the wall. Someone had engineered this space with professional precision. The stud edges were polished smooth where faces would rest, worn by forehead oil from countless hours of observation. I turned my head and discovered a photograph clipped to the interior frame, positioned for easy viewing by whoever lay in this hidden space. It showed my face in sleep, shot from inches away with telephoto precision that captured every detail of unconscious vulnerability. A gloved hand floated in the frame, fingers spread wide, counting the distance my breath traveled. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like someone learning to calibrate intimacy. The glove's index finger showed familiar abrasion, flour residue still visible on its surface. The photograph's edges remained tacky with chemical moisture, indicating recent development. The apartment door's lock turned from inside with quiet mechanical decision, the sound of someone who possessed legitimate access. The chain I had taped to the frame lifted with surgical precision, raised and lowered as gently as placing a sleeping child back in their crib. The wedge beneath the door pressed deeper into the wood with a sound like exhaled breath, and my phone lost signal only to regain it moments later, displaying 3:17 a.m. In the nest, the second page of notes listed my daily rituals with temporal precision. 1:07 tea preparation, 1:13 deadbolt verification, 1:15 chain engagement, 1:17 balcony security check, 2-hour kitchen visit for water, 3:17 door listening behavior. The third page contained a confession written in that same controlled script, 4 words that transformed my understanding of everything. Home already occupied. No elaboration, just the simple statement that this space had never truly been mine. I picked up the inside key and examined the wardrobe space with new understanding. Hidden beneath decorative molding, disguised as a furniture caster, was a lock mechanism I'd never noticed. I knelt and inserted the key with trembling fingers. It turned with the smoothness of frequent use, and the wardrobe's base swung open to reveal a deeper cavity. A rope ladder descended not into the apartment below, but into the wall itself, into the building's hidden circulatory system, where the real residents moved through spaces between spaces. I did not climb down. I sat on the displaced mattress and listened to footsteps in the hallway, maintaining their respectful 14-pace distance. The sound of someone who had learned my rhythms better than I knew them myself. The taxi arrival notification appeared on my phone, and I walked to the elevator where doors opened to reveal a driver waving from the building's entrance. He wore leather gloves and displayed the gentle smile I'd learned to recognize. "Maintenance," he said like a courtesy. On his passenger seat, a ring of keys caught the light, balanced on leather with the precision of tools, arranged for specific purposes. I stepped back into my apartment and left the suitcase where it stood, understanding that leaving with luggage would be the easiest form of surveillance to track. The rope ladder in the wardrobe shifted with a soft sigh, as if tested by someone else's weight, moments before my discovery. Rain pressed against the glass with renewed intensity, and I wrote in my notebook, "Do not go by car. Do not go by stairs. We will go by inside, through the spaces they've prepared for us. Rest for a moment in the sound of the storm. Let it wash over your consciousness, like white noise designed for deeper purposes. Breathe with the rain's rhythm. The building is listening, learning, preparing for whatever comes next in this carefully orchestrated performance." I pulled on my headlamp and wrapped electrical tape around the lens to create a softer, less penetrating beam, the kind of light that wouldn't trigger motion sensors or alert distant watchers to my movement through their carefully constructed domain. The rope ladder flexed under my weight, with the memory of other bodies, other descents into this hidden world. Each rung had been worn smooth in the center from repeated use, the coarse fibers polished by countless palms and soles. I counted each rung like stair steps, because numbers provide structure when reality becomes fluid, when the familiar geometry of home dissolves into something alien and purposeful. I closed the wardrobe panel behind me to maintain atmospheric pressure, to keep my apartment's air from collapsing into this narrow arterial system that threaded through the building's bones. Inside the wall, geometry followed rules I'd never learned in any architecture class. The extra line from the service map now had texture and temperature, substance and meaning. The air was thick with dust and human occupation, carrying scents of old heat, ozone from unseen electronics, and that persistent metallic tang mixed with lemon residue. The hallway outside existed in parallel, visible through slits installed at baseboard level, each opening polished smooth by foreheads and breath, by eyes that had watched through these apertures for months or years. Someone's chalk marks ran along the wooden studs in looping handwriting. Same hour, same curve. The phrase repeated until it had worn grooves in the raw lumber, burnished by sleeved forearms sliding past, until the message had become physical scripture carved into the building's skeleton. I moved forward through passages that narrowed and widened like organic tunnels, brushing past a maintenance jacket hung on a nail, driven into a support beam. The garment bore the corrected logo I'd seen before. Maintenance E, carefully repaired to maintenance, with professional precision. The fabric was still damp from recent wear. The inside breast pocket contained a laminated badge displaying my name and photograph, clearly lifted from surveillance footage. In the pockets accumulated lint, lemon rind, grated to fine powder, the residue of someone preparing my tea with scientific precision, an intimacy so invasive it made my stomach clench. My shoulder pressed against a panel that gave way to reveal an observation niche, and through its narrow slit, I could see my living room in perfect detail. On the couch sat my abandoned suitcase, and in the kitchen, a mug weighted with a wedge of lemon balanced on its rim like an offering to routines I'd never consciously established. Someone had been in my apartment while I explored these hidden passages, maintaining the illusion of normalcy while I discovered the reality of surveillance. The niches multiplied as I progressed deeper into the wall system. One provided a view of my neighbor's hallway, where work boots leaned against a baseboard marked with familiar flower arcs. Another showed the mop woman sitting on a wooden crate, her cap removed and hair loose, eating a sandwich with slow, deliberate movements, a mundane moment made terrifying by the context of hidden observation. A third niche revealed the monitor room active again, the clipboard man standing with hands clasped, while someone unseen spoke in whispers, carrying command authority. At an intersection of support beams, someone had wedged a mirror that reflected my pale face back at me with startling clarity. Behind the reflection, another figure approached through the cramped passages, gloves, maintenance jacket, key ring muffled to prevent metallic sounds. The smile was audible in their footsteps, that patient gentleness I'd learned to fear. They stopped at precisely my distance and matched my breathing rhythm. "You can't be in here without proper authorization," they said, lifting the badge from the jacket pocket, my name facing me like an accusation. "Now you have what you need." They extended a key attached to a brass tag reading exit in block letters. I didn't accept it. You signed the agreements, they continued with practiced patience. Everyone signs when they move in. The lease includes sound monitoring, behavioral observation. Rain helps some people sleep peacefully. You're not one of those people. Some residents require active management to achieve optimal rest patterns. They spoke as if this were medical diagnosis rather than systematic violation. In an observation slit above us, a green digital display changed numbers with soft electronic beeps. Viewers. 0457 became 0482, suggesting an audience I'd never imagined. Subjects learn more effectively when they understand they're being observed, my guide added. Performance improves with awareness of evaluation. They led me through intersecting passages to a junction that opened onto a room resembling a corporate server closet. Racks of humming equipment, climate control systems clicking through cycles, air tasting of plastic and electronic heat. Banks of monitors showed my apartment from multiple angles, including the crawl space I'd discovered and the rope ladder I'd descended. Comments scrolled across one screen in pale text. Smile, keys, same hour. The words echoed my own notebook entries, my private observations now part of a public feed. A secondary monitor revealed the broader context, a warehouse floor where maintenance uniforms hung in organized rows and chairs faced audio control panels. The rain I'd been hearing wasn't tonight's weather. It was curated selection from an extensive library, chosen for psychological effects, and played through speakers I'd never noticed. I moved to the electrical panel at the room's rear, the master control for the behavior modification switches I'd discovered earlier. I pulled wake down and pushed sleep up, then yanked the main power disconnect. The monitors went black with electronic sighs. Climate control fell silent, and the building held its breath in genuine darkness. The artificial rain stopped immediately, but outside, real weather continued its natural percussion against glass and metal, indifferent to our technological manipulations. In the sudden silence, I ran, not toward escape, but toward my apartment, navigating the hidden passages using the mental map I'd constructed, through studs and observation slits, past the nest where someone had lived, parallel to my life. I climbed back through the wardrobe's concealed entrance and pushed the panel closed. I braced it with the mattress and sat in my reclaimed space, listening to the building's authentic sounds without electronic enhancement. Under my bed, a soft metallic whisper announced keys sliding against keys, someone's tools shifting in hidden spaces. On my pillow, where the inside key had originally appeared, lay a new message in that familiar handwriting. Same hour, same curve. Now you watch. The roles had shifted, the observer had become the observed, but the game continued with new rules I was only beginning to understand. Breathe with the real weather now. Let the authentic storm provide your rhythm. That's all I can give you for tonight. The rest of this story continues in spaces I haven't mapped yet, in hours that haven't arrived, in observations that haven't been made. The building waits, patient and watchful, for whatever comes next.